Stamps are much more than just tiny perforated pieces of paper you stick on an envelope and pop in a postbox. This podcast celebrates these beautiful miniature works of art and the talented creators behind them. Each month for 60 years, Royal Mail has released a first day cover, a set of special stamps and souvenirs, celebrating aspects of British nature, history, culture and wider society. May 2025's issue celebrates the 75th anniversary of the publication of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, the first book in C.S. Lewis's celebrated series, The Chronicles of Narnia. And I'm delighted that today's guest is the illustrator behind these 8 new stamps. It's Keith Robinson. So Keith is somebody who is immersed in the world of Narnia, its creatures, characters, as a child, and also as a youngster who collected first day covers. This must have been a dream commission for you.
Yeah, it really was. I think if I could have told my young self that I'd be, not only illustrating stamps, but they'd be about Narnia, I'd have completely flipped. I think he's obsessed a strong word. I don't think so. I think it's fair to say I was pretty obsessed with Narnia, from the age of about 6. They're the first chapter books that I remember having read to me. And actually the first book I ever read to myself completely was Prince Caspian, and I was off school with bronchitis, and it was just I remember it being this huge achievement that wow, I've read an entire book. But when I was little, certainly kind of around 6, I couldn't imagine that Narnia wasn't real. It just seemed so vivid to me that it's like, well, this must be a place, and these Pevensey kids are getting there, so I must be able to get there as well. So I had a habit of walking into wardrobes when I was a kid. So if we went, it must have been awkward for my parents, because if we went visiting relatives or whatever, I'd disappear and they'd find me upstairs just kind of looking for a wardrobe to saunter into. It's like, maybe this is going to be the one. And I remember as well in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, the way the kids get to Narnia, they see a picture of what they feel is a Narnian ship. And they're sort of magically transported through the picture and into Narnia. So I avidly covered the picture of the ship off the cover of the book and stuck it on my bedroom wall, and I'd just sit staring at it, for ages, thinking, come on, let me get there. It was a big part of my childhood, and it kind of formed me as a reader and someone who enjoyed imaginative fiction and fantasy fiction. The other part of this is the fact that I had an uncle who always used to buy me first day covers when they came out, and I've still got an album full of them. I can't remember quite how many I've got, but it was over several years. And I used to just love poring over the detail of stamps. I particularly liked they did some wildlife issues, and they were just these beautifully rendered kind of squirrels and, badgers. It was British wildlife. But also just the range of styles that stamps have. And I was just sort of fascinated by them as these little artworks when I was a kid, and the collectible nature of them as well.
I recall my first day cover was in 1979. It was the International Year of the Child first day cover, and these beautiful illustrations again of childhood novels of Alice in Wonderland and Wind in the Willows, and I've still got that set today. It's they stay with you, and I think them out every so often. So Royal Mail come calling. How did the commission play out? What was the process?
Well, the initial inquiry came through my agent, and it was, Royal Mail have asked you. It was a competitive pitch, mm-hmm. So there are several artists, submitting samples. And initially, it was, we can't say too much, but it's going to be, a well-loved classic of children's literature, which, that narrows the field a little bit, and pretty much anything that could have been, I'd have just been over the moon to illustrate. And the fact that it's Royal Mail, I've wanted to do a set of Royal Mail stamps for quite a long time. So that was just, a dream thing to have come. And from there, eventually I worked with a design agency, Supple Studio, who were sort of mediating between the artists and Royal Mail. So I got a brief from them, did some samples for, I think we sampled Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe and Dawn Treader initially. And as I say, that was a competitive pitch. So, luckily, and to my absolute amazement, I got the gig. And that was quite a moment.
But not your first foray into the world of stamp artwork.
No, so interesting. Yeah, I've worked with Guernsey Post, their philatelic department, since about 2009, actually, I think. So I've had a slightly split career. For a long time, I was actually doing TV graphics and design, which wasn't what I intended after leaving art school. I'd always intended to be an illustrator, but, various sort of left turns took me in a slightly different direction. But it was something I was trying to build up alongside my design practice and, eventually trying to shift the balance so that I could be a full-time illustrator. And the work for Guernsey Post was a great break, and it was really sort of fundamental in me being able to develop an illustration style. So when I look back over, I think I've done about 10 issues for them, over those years. I'd do maybe one every couple of years or something. And they were a really nice client because they generally approached me with narrative-based subjects. So I think the first one I did was commemorating Sherlock Holmes. And over the years, when I look back at them, it's almost I can sort of see the step-by-step development in the way that I was working, just sort of actually improving my artistic chops, as it were, but also trying different mediums, different styles. And also, of course, there's the design challenges of doing stamps around accommodating the monarch's head, the denomination, any text that's involved. So coming to the Narnia stamps, it was really nice to have a little bit of previous, dealing with those sorts of issues.
And give us a flavour of some of those editions for Guernsey. You mentioned Holmes and you've done Christmas. Give us a few of the themes you've worked on.
Yeah, the Christmas ones were quite an important job for me because it was around that time I was starting to experiment with a way of working, which was a combination of digital art, so painting in Photoshop with a particular set of brushes which can replicate quite organic feeling marks, and also scanning in hand-drawn artwork and sort of combining those two ways of working. And I'd done a little bit of personal work experimenting with that, and the Christmas stamps for Guernsey was the first sort of professional job where I, thought, right, I think I'm onto something here. Let's give it a go. And so that became quite an important piece of work in terms of, furthering subsequent commissions and so on that I got. Yeah.
Royal Mail choose to work with you. What kind of brief do they provide? What are they asking you to do?
So initially it was quite specific scenes. So it was the scene where Lucy meets Tumnus in the woods by the lamppost, that iconic scene, which was just, a dream. It's something I've always wanted to, have a stab at. And for Dawn Treader, it was to illustrate the ship. So two quite different things, one very character-based and one much more environment and sort of lighting and weather-based, the ship on the sea. And so in approaching that, although it's quite a specific scene, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, Lucy and Tumnus, there are different ways of approaching it. So I did, I think, 3 different roughs, just experimenting with different moments in their actual meeting, slightly different angles and compositions. And the one that actually became the stamp is quite interesting because they're a little bit at a remove from each other. So the lamppost is somewhat in the distance and Tumnus is underneath it, and Lucy has just sort of walked into the clearing, and it's just the moment where they've encountered each other and he's dropping his parcels, and so it's like a little moment of time. And some of the other versions I did were they were a bit more close together, or there was another one which Tumnus hasn't yet seen Lucy, and so it's just interesting how you work around something which on the face of it is quite prescriptive, but you can bring out different sort of dramatic beats, if you like, depending on how you orchestrate the image.
And can you explore the process with us in terms of how long it takes and how you work?
Yeah, so generally, the stamps were no different. So I'll start by responding to the brief just in my own sketchbook. I just do lots and lots of really scribbly thumbnail sketches, which wouldn't mean anything to anybody except me, and which, I probably wouldn't show to anybody. But it's sort of a visual shorthand for me just to explore different ideas, different ways of doing things. And then when I think I'm onto something, I'll translate that into a more fully worked up rough, which is usually black and white. I used to rough things out actually with line work, but I've gradually started just blocking things out in black and white, sort of solid areas of tone, because it's much easier to establish the sort of mood and the tonal values of the composition like that. So that's the point where I'll do perhaps 2 or 3 different variations. And then the client sees those, there's some feedback, there's some discussion. They'll choose a direction that they like, and then we'll move through to a colour rough, which just establishes the basic palette. And with these stamps, it's quite interesting, actually, because although they're all very different scenes from different books, there's a couple of unifying factors. One is there's a strong light source in all of them. And each of them have their distinctive palette, but the palettes sort of work together as a set, which is an interesting challenge. So it's quite important to rough out those colour palettes and values at an early stage. And then there's more feedback. Eventually we'll go through to final art, and quite an interesting collaboration as well, because it's quite a demanding thing doing stamps. You know, they're obviously, they have a very wide audience. It's a very high prestigious brand. And so, you know, they have to be absolutely spot on. And actually we eventually came to a really lovely collaborative process where I'd do Teams calls with the design manager at Royal Mail and the people at the design studio who were running the job. And I would actually just screen share and draw live in Photoshop, so that, you know, rather than trying to address feedback and comments through endless rounds of emailing images, which is quite an inefficient and torturous way of doing it, we were actually able to just do it live, and I could just kind of mock things up. And, you know, it was like, well, yes, we like that. Can you do that a little bit differently? And it was just a really nice collaborative way of arriving at the final image.
So you have Royal Mail, the client, to keep happy, but also, of course, these have been beloved books for generations, a large fan base, readers with their own personal, subjective interpretation of the characters, the creatures, the worlds. How do you deal with that? Do you have to disassociate yourself from everybody else's vision of what Narnia looks like and what these characters look like?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, if I'm honest, that didn't weigh on me too heavily. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. You can't get into the game of trying to please everybody, because you would just tie yourself in knots. But I mean, Narnia, as I've described, goes quite deep in my DNA. So I had a clear vision of my own version of Narnia, which I was sort of heading towards in producing the artwork. And I think you just have to hope that if you're treating it with integrity, then people will find something in it. It might not be their Narnia, but it might perhaps remind them of their Narnia. If they haven't read the books for a while, it might entice people who haven't read the books to go to them. I think the biggest shoes to fill, actually, was following on from the original illustrator, Pauline Baynes, who I'm a huge fan of. And I think her original illustrations for the books are so inseparable from the text, in the same way that Ernest Shepard's illustrations are inseparable from Winnie the Pooh, that I was very conscious of finding a different way of approaching illustrating Narnia and doing something that wasn't trying to follow in her footsteps in terms of that very beautiful, delicate line work and the particular quality she had. So I just tried to do something that was fresh, looked contemporary, but had a sort of timeless feel. And, you know, I suppose at the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, if this was an animated version of the Narnia books, how might a still from that film look? And that was sort of my touchstone, I suppose. And
Pauline Baynes' original work, features alongside yours in this collection on the miniature sheet, other souvenirs, including medal covers. I wonder how it feels for you, having admired her work, to have your work featured alongside hers in perhaps the framed stamp set, for instance. That must be a source of pride.
I mean, it's a huge honour and kind of amazing, really. It's a little bit scary as well for me, just because, I mean, they say don't meet your heroes. I guess I've kind of inadvertently met in a sort of abstract way. But yeah, it's odd for me seeing my work against hers. I'm not sure if I like it. I'm not sure if I like making the comparison. But yeah, it's again just such an honour to be, you know, A, next to Pauline Baynes' work and B, on a Royal Mail product. And during the process, you're thinking about there's a huge level of detail goes into your work. Are you taking a step back and thinking, okay, this needs to become a 4 centimetre wide
work of art. How do you accommodate that during the process? Do you think about it? Do you take a step back and think, how would this look at 4 centimetres size?
Yeah, you have to. So in terms of doing the work, obviously you don't work at that tiny size. So I'll be working generally between sort of 400, 600% up. So the actual canvas I'm working on, albeit a sort of virtual digital canvas, is a lot bigger. But when I'm working, I'm constantly zooming out and reducing the image down to roughly the size that it'll be seen. Because the design challenge really is making sure that the image reads easily at a small scale. And to achieve that, you want to make sure you don't have a lot of overlapping action that would get muddied when the artwork's reduced. But at the same time, because the print quality of stamps is so beautiful, there is potential to add quite a lot of detail. So there are two things going on really. Does it read at a small scale, but is there enough in there to hold the interest of somebody who might want to go in with a magnifying glass and really examine it? Or indeed, when I think there are some postcard products and some other things where the imagery is bigger, it has to hold up like that as well. So yeah, I mean, it sounds harder than it is actually. I mean, I think when you get your head in that space, you just kind of find a way of working that fits both those requirements. And
during the creative process, do you have to remove yourself from the image, or do you place yourself within the scene?
Well, it's funny, given how long I tried getting to Narnia when I was a kid. I find I have this strange thing when I'm making an illustration of anything, actually, whether it's Narnia or a book cover, that this odd displacement happens where I'm kind of living in the image while I'm doing it. Once all the difficult stuff has been sorted out, like the composition, and we've been through all that rough stage, and I'm just making the thing. Then yeah, it's like existing in that world somehow. It's a little bit like when you wake from a particularly vivid dream, and it follows you around in the day. So it's almost like having kind of a foot in both those realities. So in a strange kind of way, I guess I did get to Narnia by living in these pictures for a while.
So for listeners or viewers who may be with us and they're collectors and they perhaps have the stamps with them, just give us an indication of maybe which is your favourite from the set.
I think the first one, the classic Lucy and Tumnus scene, is such a gift to an illustrator, having this snowy forest, the pool of light that's cast by the lamp, the interaction between those characters. It's just such a joy to illustrate. I mean, kind of tricky as well because it is the iconic scene, and it's been done quite a lot, I guess, just as one of those iconic moments from literature. So, I hope I've brought something new and fresh to it. But yeah, that was definitely, it was one of those things that just sort of fell out right. There were a couple of them I really struggled with to sort of achieve the look and the feel and the sort of narrative elements that were required. But yeah, that one it was just sort of there, which was lovely.
We're talking in May 2025. I think you handed over the final artwork in September 2024. Today was the first time I think you'd seen the stamps in real life. How did that feel when you first saw them?
Yeah, it was really strange because I think it was September we handed in the finals. It was certainly last year. So I've sort of moved on to other projects. Yeah. I've got my head in other things. So yeah, it was nice. It's lovely just seeing stamps just because they're such beautiful objects. But yeah, it was pleasing to see that they do actually work. And having had a bit of distance, there's always a bit of a curve going through a project where you think this is going to be the best thing ever when you start out. And then you think, actually, this is quite hard. And then you hit a trough where it's like, oh my God, this is the worst thing I've ever done. And then eventually you get to a point where you think, well, that's kind of there. And maybe it's not quite what I started out envisaging. So I have a peculiar love-hate relationship with my own work. But I find after a few months have passed, I can go back with fresh eyes and think, yeah, you know what, they're all right.
So the Chronicles of Narnia stamps and souvenirs are out in the wild, millions and millions of them flying around the world. How will it feel when you pop one on an envelope or see one posted through your letterbox? It will feel really real then, surely.
Well, really surreal. I mean, just the thought that those things that I sit in my studio, for months, just kind of producing on my own, are suddenly out there in the world, and there are, probably it'll be the biggest reach I've ever had with something I've done. So that is a strange thought, and it's a little bit scary as well. It's always exciting putting work out into the world, but it's always a little bit scary because you don't know, how things will be received. But the thing I love about stamps is, they can be really special and collectible, and sometimes very valuable. But they're also completely disposable. It's something you just stick on an envelope and stick in a postbox and forget about. And there's something really democratic about that. It's like a little bit of art for everybody, which I think is great.
Thanks, Keith. Well, for the complete collection of the Chronicles of Narnia stamps and souvenirs, including a limited edition signed, framed work of art from Keith himself, visit the Royal Mail shop online, where you can also find a host of previous special stamp collections.